Why fall versus winter as far as when is it a good time to sell? I had said the fall is a better time. I think what happens by the time you get to the end of the year, inventory is so nominal, inventory is so tight that even though demand and supply move pretty close hand in hand, I think that by the end of the year, there's just really not a whole lot to choose from. And so depending on how picky you are, it can be difficult to find a home in the winter. What I find with the late summer, early fall is that there's still a decent amount of inventory. There's still those homeowners that haven't sold yet. They're kind of holding on to hope that maybe there's still a buyer out there. And yet the demand has started to come down pretty significantly. I think between summer vacations, kids going back to school, just that season of being really active on the demand side, it slows down. So I'm really an advocate that if you're thinking about buying, kind of that August, September, October, it can be pretty ideal. And so it's better to try and upgrade your home if you can't. Basically, if you can't find the right home. I mean, I would say the most financially conservative decision is, yes, it's always going to be to stay where you are, because the reality is when you're not selling, you're not giving up any equity, right, in the sale. Um, and obviously you're not moving into something that's more expensive, so it's more conservative. I mean, buying a bigger, better home isn't always the best financial decision. It's usually a lifestyle decision, right? Not everybody makes decisions based. If people only made decisions based on what's most financially prudent, there would be no Gucci purses, there would be no Louis Vuitton purses, and there would be no fancy cars, right? But we don't make decisions just based on the financial implications. We do tend to make decisions based on kind of the meeting of the two, right? The financial, does it make sense? Can I justify it? And then that emotional lifestyle, really what I want for my life. Another great question here. What is the cost benefit of paying points? So this is really a question of if you have a long-term or a short-term approach to that house. In other words, if you are not going to be in that house for very long, maybe 3 or 4 years, it probably does not make sense to pay points to get a lower interest rate, because you're probably going to pay more than you save over that following 2, 3, 4 years. Now, the opposite is true. If you plan on buying a home that you're going to live in for 20 years, you're literally buying your forever home, or a 20-year home. It could absolutely make sense to pay points, because your payback period might be 3 or 4 years, and then after that, you're in the black. So what most lenders will do, what I've even helped clients do, is figure out what's the cost of buying down that rate, and then what's the payback period. In other words, if it takes 2 years to get paid back, in other words, it takes you 2 years to get the amount of savings to justify having paid the points, that could make a lot of sense. If it takes 8 years to get paid back for what you paid to get the lower payment, it might not make sense. It's really a payback question, and which I know is a bit convoluted of an answer, but it's something that I could definitely work out with you and kind of look at that specific scenario for you. Another question we have here: can I get my earnest money back if I decide not to buy? That's a great question. I would say that is, of all the concerns that buyers have, I would say that's the number one concern. Most buyers that are writing a check for 10, 15, 20, 30, $50,000 to escrow are wondering, what the heck happens to my money if something goes wrong? Well, the great thing about your contingency period in California, you've got this tire kicking period where your deposit is protected, so that if you cancel within your contingency period, you do get your deposit back and it is not at risk. And then another question we have here is, since the demand is so high, should I make an offer sight unseen to get a leg up? That is something that I have seen buyers do, where you're actually putting an offer on a property without even seeing it to tie it up, and then doing your inspection and going in and looking at it. Now, a lot of listing agents, in the industry, we call that a blind offer. A lot of listing agents won't accept blind offers because they don't want to get into escrow with somebody that very likely could back out. So it's a bit more of a nuanced question, but yes, you can make an offer without actually seeing a home. And then another question here: does my type of financing affect the strength of my offer? Yeah, that's a great question. It absolutely does. Listing agents like to see higher down. They love cash. Why would a cash offer be favored over a financed offer? Mostly because there's no loan to contend with. There's no appraisal. There's no chance of the buyer not qualifying. It's really just much more open and shut. So oftentimes, if you have a higher down or if you're a cash buyer, you can sometimes negotiate a slightly better price if it's apples to apples. In other words, I may see a seller take a cash offer or a higher down offer that's three or five or $8,000 less than another offer on the table. Likely, if the offer on the table, that's the lower financing, the lower down is $15,000 higher, they'll probably take that offer because it's enough of a buffer that it just makes sense to roll the dice and take the higher offer. What happens if the house appraises under the offer price? That's a great question. So I said earlier that your appraisal is like your safety valve. If you're offering $800,000 on a house and it appraises at 770, you've got a way out of the deal. Now I'll tell you, when that happens, it's kind of like I said early on, everything's negotiable. If an appraisal comes in low, it's really back to the negotiating table. The seller does not have to lower the price to the appraised value. The buyer does not have to pay the difference and pay the higher purchase price. So normally what happens is it's a meeting of the two, and it's some kind of meeting in the middle. Depending on how hot the market is, what the specific situation was, if they had multiple offers, typically there'll be some kind of negotiation where maybe the buyer comes up a little bit over the appraised value, closer to their purchase price, and maybe the seller comes down a little bit to still make the deal happen.